This is Completely Ordinary, and I'm Joey Lott, and I'm joined today by Scott Kiloby. And so thanks, Scott, for being here with me.
Thanks, Joey, for having me.
Yeah, and just before I hit record, we were briefly talking about how we don't really know that much about one another, so this will be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So Scott, you were telling me your main work, your focus right now is with the Kiloby, what's it called? The Kiloby Center for Addiction, Recovery. Yeah, and that's in Palm Springs.
That's in Palm Springs, California.
Yeah, and you've been doing that for 3 years now.
Yeah, about 2.5 years, close to 2.5.
So a lot of people who are watching this probably familiar with your work in what we'll call the non-duality niche, and but probably not familiar. So a lot of people probably not familiar with your work with recovery. I mean, maybe to some extent because you've talked about that. I mean, I've watched some of your videos, so I know that you've talked about recovery in some of your non-duality work. But maybe let's just talk about what you're doing with the recovery stuff.
Yeah, it was really a nice thing that happened. I was kind of going around the country giving talks on addiction, kind of from a non-dual standpoint, whatever that is, and then some people came up to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to invest in a center," and I was like, "Great!" And so we picked a place, and then we moved there and opened it, really not knowing what we were doing, quite frankly, because I'm not a healthcare provider. I was not that at first at all, and so there's just been a lot of learning about how to do that, and then so. No, but it's been great. I mean, I say that I have the best job ever, and it's such a cliche, but I really do because it's something that's very interesting to me. The subject of non-duality, yes, but also just addiction, since I went through a lot of it myself. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, is that what brought you to non-duality in the first place?
Yeah, I think so. With the drugs and alcohol, there was obviously lots of seeking. That's really what drugs and alcohol is all about. I mean,
sure.
But then when I stopped the drugs and alcohol, it was like, well, what am I going to look for now? Eventually that went to, oh, I'm going to look for enlightenment, because that seems like the best drug possible. At least that's what I thought,
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, the seeking just easily took towards that at that point. And so I think that's why I don't understand it all about seeking. I don't understand exactly where the impulse comes from, but it was certainly strong in me, after that.
Yeah. Do you feel like that impulse, that seeking impulse, has completely disappeared in you, or does that still exist?
The seeking for awakening or for a sense of self has.
Yeah.
But they're seeking in all sorts of forms that I experienced in different degrees, even after all of that. I mean, little things like, because what do we seek for things in the world? Even after the so-called awakening experience, there were times when I was seeking still to be right. I was seeking, for more love from my partner or something, or to be heard, or, and just as part of my conditioning. So I guess it depends on how you define seeking. But seeking for enlightenment, no, there's nothing there. They're seeking, mostly not seeking for a sense of self, although I think there's a seeking for a sense of self in when one tries to be right, or one tries to get love, or whatever. There's still some sense of self in that. So it's a funny way to define what seeking really is,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting because at least I thought that, like you said, that this enlightenment was the ultimate drug. I mean, that was the ultimate high. That was the high I was never going to have to come back down from, and
right.
It was going to fulfill every desire that I could ever have. I would never want for anything.
Yeah.
And then it's also promoted a lot, especially in the this no self thing. It's promoted that once you discover that there's no self, then you won't ever have that seeking impulse to better yourself or to protect yourself or to any of that. Like there'll just be an absence of all of that, which is it's a good sell, because I mean that stuff can be unpleasant and uncomfortable and painful. But at least my experience is that for me, the discovery was that nothing had to go away, because none of it was ever what I thought it was to begin with.
That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I do relate to what you say about no seeking for enlightenment, because once you kind of see through that, then it just doesn't hold any appeal, because I discovered that there wasn't something there that could give me what I thought it was going to give me.
Yeah, exactly. So we should go back to that. It's a good sale thing, because I think there's a lot to talk about there. But I was just speaking. A friend of mine, I guess you could say he was a teacher at one point, Greg Good. I was talking about this whole thing about seeking, and he was mentioning that when his girlfriend was being questioned about her immigration status in the U.S., that she sought to defend herself. And, and he said that was the proper thing to do, because she had proper status and she had to prove it. And, that goes to this whole thing, like, do we become bumbling idiots?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything ever to protect or defend ourselves against, even in a relative sense, like even a functional sense? I mean, that's not my experience at all. Life does definitely go on, and there are actions to be taken and reactions that happen. And I think you did point it out there in the way that you said it, is that there is much more of a lightness around all of that. It's like you might not get hooked in anywhere near you did the way that you did before, but the reaction can still be there, and sometimes it's appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that right. That's so that a topic that's been coming up a lot recently in email exchanges that I've had with people has been a subject of depression. Not surprisingly, I think a lot of people experience depression, and if not almost all people. And one theme that comes up a lot is people, they seem to try and they wrestle with what seems like a conflict, because they think that they're being told, and sometimes I think they are being told by some people, that you should not do anything. It's bad and wrong to do anything. Any efforting is bad. But then, of course, they're feeling bad. I mean, being depressed is not only miserable, but it can be life-threatening, right? And people are struggling with this conflict of, well, I'm being told that in order to get enlightenment, which is the carrot that's being held out in front of me, I should not do anything. I should not have any desire. Like, I shouldn't desire to feel better.
Right.
But then at the same time, they're sinking further into depression because, well, I shouldn't say because. I mean, sometimes there's nothing that can be done, or there's nothing that we can find to do. But sometimes, at least my experience is, sometimes there is something that I can do.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to encourage people, well, if there's something you can do, then do it.
Do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do it. I think that's great, because the emails that I used to get, and I still get them sometimes, were around addiction. There were some around depression, definitely that those came, but I think because I was sharing about addiction, the emails would come, and there was always a certain percentage of those emails. I don't know what the percentage was, but there was always a certain percentage of people who would come from the non-dual framework, and they would say things like, I've had a lot of insight. I understand that there's no self and all that. That I love that prefacing statement.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but I'm drinking myself to death every day.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that I understand it is that there's nothing I can do about that, and no one to do it. And I'm thinking, absolutely not. I mean, there's definitely something. You can go into detox today. There are detox centers here today that can get you off that.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you want to do that. And it's really very sad, actually, the way that message can get downloaded.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, it's actually very damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the work that you do in your recovery center. This is recovery from any kind of addiction. Is that right?
Yeah, but we get a lot of drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
Right.
And
but yeah, every addiction, any addiction, we've seen it just about all of the main addictions.
Yeah. So I remember looking at your site a while ago. I don't remember offhand, but you have a staff. You have an MD on staff, right?
We have an MD that oversees our utilization review, our insurance review, and then we refer people to him, and then we have a psychologist. And
yeah.
So
it's, I mean, you're full service, but it seems like you're also bringing a unique angle to recovery, which is, I'm guessing, informed by the work that you did prior to opening the center with inquiry and things of that nature. Is that true?
Yeah, it's a lot of it. If you think of what addiction really is, I mean, we could go on and on about what it is, but one of the main things about it is that people who are doing a lot of drugs and alcohol are not tuned in to allowing themselves to feel what's coming up. So a lot of it is around being present to what they feel and stripping away some of the beliefs around what they feel so that they can just feel it and then move through it. And presence is really good for that, obviously, as you know. I mean, it's just a bare naked feeling of something. So then it's around that and inquiry. Yes, non-dual inquiry, but we don't really bring that in the beginning. We don't sort of come in for the guy right out of detox and say, hey, look, let me show you there's no self. We work towards that if they become, but in the beginning, it's just about physically stabilizing, and then dealing with some of the repressed emotions, the traumatic emotions through a presence approach. And then getting them to sort of, acquire the skill of being able to examine their experience as things arise, and working on the stuff that they definitely want to work. I mean, most people are really okay with looking at seeing that they aren't someone who's not good enough, because nobody really likes that story. Well, I mean, that's even debatable. There's some draw towards stories like that, but we don't get to the no self thing unless and until somebody is really ready for that. And then even when that happens, as you know, there's more looking. Even that happens. There's more kind of embodiment or deepening that if somebody stays open to. And just to say is that we've had people who've come and have had really powerful shifts, but then there are just as many traps on the other end of that as there were before. And so we've seen people relapse after a shift, and it can get bad, actually.
Yeah. So you typically stay in contact with people after they leave the center, or how does that work?
Yeah, as much as we can. I mean, we've got case managers who keep in contact with people. We have an aftercare system so that people have contact with us, and they have contact with other people in the program and other people in recovery. So, it's a small to medium-sized center so that we can keep that kind of contact with people. Yeah.
And so you said this is the best job that you could have. I mean, so so you're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, because you mentioned about conditioning and does it all fall away? I was an attorney before all of this, and there's still that part of me that enjoys the business and an attorney, the legal side of things. That I can tell you that I hold it a lot differently than I used to, but there's still that enjoys that part of it because it's just the way that I'm made up, whatever that is.
Sure.
So there's that, but the great thing is that we get to have an addiction center that is based around this work, and they're not, as far as I know, there aren't any other ones out there, and so we're offering that to people, which is unique.
That what you say there about the your makeup, the way that you're wired. I think that's an interesting point, because I was thinking about this, that I don't remember when your first books came out, but I remember it was right around the end of my. It was close to around the end of my really intense seeking for enlightenment, and I remember seeing them. I would still look for new books, and I remember seeing your books pop up, and I had this little voice that said, kind of, you don't need to do that. Like, you don't look for another contemporary living person, because you're just going to get yourself into trouble. Like, you've done
Right.
enough of that. And but I do remember seeing, it was all of a sudden just seeing your name all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think people have this idea that, especially in this spiritual market, that people who the teachers, or whoever whatever you want to call them, somehow have earned that through their merit, right? That they just, it's like their karma or something, that they just come onto the scene, and and they're blessed or something like that. And so that, if I see Scott Kiloby's name, it's because Scott Kiloby has been, tapped on the head by God or whatever. But I think people just completely forget that you actually showed up and did the work, and you're an ambitious person.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it is, yeah, I mean, exactly. Well, the thing about it is the reason that some of those books were written wasn't just because there was this great insight that I was willing to share. It's that my conditioning is that I love to create.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I mean, but I did that when I was on drugs. You know what I mean? I created when I was on drugs, and I created when I wasn't on drugs, and I created before the awakening experience, and I created after.
Yeah.
And you're really seeing, more than anything, that part of whoever I am is just loving to create, like songs, books, a Kiloby Center, living inquiries. So that's really what you're seeing. It's not that someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, you have the divine wisdom, now share it. It wasn't like that at all. It was like, I just like to create. I like to express. And then, it comes out maybe looking like, I got the magic wand tap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really not like that. I mean, attorneys write, I've read attorneys write something like a large percentage more prose than novel writers and poets.
Mm-hmm.
So we, as our profession, we write more prose than really anybody. Mm-hmm. So it's not unusual that when this happened to me, you just see a lot of prose. That's all. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that dispels that idea, because, I mean, and there is a certain, I don't know a lot about you, Joey, but I'm sure that when things shifted for you, you began to express things, because I've heard your name. And so there is that part of it, that something does happen, and there's this, for some people, there's this expression that comes out, and there's that too. But how it comes out and how big it comes out often has a lot to do with the personal filter of who's, I don't think it's just some sort of divine background that there's a lot of personalness in it, and a relativeness in all of that.
Yeah. Well, right. It's same for me, but I've always been a creator, and I've always been a communicator. I mean, I used to work I was a computer programmer, but I spoke at conferences, and I wrote books, and I was doing all of that for, almost 15 years before I had this discovery, we'll call it, and started sharing about something different. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who have similar insights, but their sharing is very different. Maybe they just share with their neighbors while having coffee or a beer or whatever. I mean, that's their expression. So, I remember. So you mentioned the living inquiries, and so are you still involved with that?
Not really, actually. It's been taken over by some facilitators who are doing all the training, and I really don't have much hand in that at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. I mean, I don't know if you feel comfortable saying, but what's your feeling about the living inquiries now? Because it's been a number of years since you began that. Do you have a different feeling about it now?
I do actually. The way that it came about was really not as a method that I was going to give to the public, because that's another perception. Maybe someone thought, oh, he just created a method for the public. But I was actually, all that happened for me is that after the awakening experience, my husband still triggered me in certain ways. I mean, that's the reason that it came about, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like before, because, you know, there's a lot that fell away from me, but there was something in me that kept getting triggered on a certain thing from him, especially, but other people. So all I was trying to do was take some of the insights that Greg Good had showed me about unfindability, Buddhist unfindability, and to apply them in a really simple way so that I could see what was going on in my own experience and then maybe see through it. And so it really worked well. I mean, I just started to look for different things in my experience, and I would just see right through them, and it was really, really, really working for me. But then never did I think, oh, going to bring that inquiry to people. In fact, it was a friend of mine who named Bart, who sat down a few years later and said, why don't you do this for other people? And it never even occurred to me. But then it was actually a really good idea. And then I started to do that in the living inquiries. So the living inquiries are just a tool, you know, that's all that they are. They're a tool. And for a lot of people, they work really well. For me, they work really well. We still use them at the center. However, my life has also moved beyond that to some degree, because, you know, it's always I like to create, you know, it's back to that. So if you did a session with me or somebody, you might not ever get any unfindability in that session. You know, you might never see me really doing the mechanics of the living inquiries, although I could do that, but I might be interested in doing something else with you or looking a different way. So, but I think it's a great tool. All tools are what they are, you know, they're tools. And one thing that's nice about it is it's, you know, replicatable, or whatever the word is. You know, it's a tool that you can use. You can learn it and use it and show it to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But all tools have limitations in the sense that they can only do what they can do. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you know, go somewhere else. But yeah, I do feel differently about it. I still have a lot of faith in it, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just not something in the place where I'm at in my life that I use a whole lot on myself and others, because I'm always someone who's always kind of just exploring. And I just like to explore and not sort of feel like I'm caught here in some tool. I got to stay in the tool, you know. You know, that's how it feels.
Yeah, right. I can relate to that. I mean, that's interesting, because that's how I tend to approach life, is as an exploration. I'm just a curious person, and so I'm just always exploring. It's just something that, you know, I can't. To me, there's kind of a deadness in just repeating some mechanical process over and over and over. Because I mean, in a sense, I've seen that, at least it doesn't seem like, so long as I'm alive, there's a way to escape all discomfort. And so, I mean, because that was what was motivating me for a long time, was thinking
Right.
I'm going to escape all discomfort. And now that I've seen, well, that doesn't seem realistic, or necessarily even all that desirable in a kind of a weird way. Then there's it's just sort of a freedom to just explore, rather than being focused on getting rid of discomfort at any cost.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because at the Kiloby Center, what's nice about having that particular tool is that a lot of the folks, you know, if they just got off drugs and alcohol, they've never been given a tool like that, and they're not in a place where they can sort of develop something like that that's very penetrating on their own. So it's nice to give them that tool. But then what we say is just learn the rules so you know how to break them, because really these inquiries are about just being aware, and that's really what they're about. I mean, can't say much more. It's a tool to help you to notice what it's like to be presently aware, you know. And but then once you learn that, you can go from there. But it's really nice to have that at a treatment center, because I'll just tell you a little bit more about that. Is that often people, when they come off drugs and alcohol, especially if they've not had any um, experience with this kind of work, it's very, very new to them. I mean, even the idea of noticing a thought
Hmm.
is very new. Or what's it like to actually feel something without a lot of thoughts on it? Just feel it. Or
Hmm.
what's it like to notice that awareness? You know, whatever. But so it's nice to have a tool that helps them to have that skill, to develop that, whatever that is.
Hmm.
Because then they can use it then on their own. Because they might not be in a place where they can truly explore and create in a skillful way. Like you and I have been doing this for a
Hmm.
while. So it's helpful in that way. But then, like all methods, after a while, they lose their usefulness. If you and I were to track down the best method on earth, whatever that is, there's a limit. There's a limit to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have to recognize that, and then you use it until it becomes not helpful, until you have the kind of insights that you have, because I've had those too. There's no way, if the goal is to get rid of all discomfort, it's not going to work, you know. And at some point, I think your disposition changes around the phenomena, you know, and whatever you were using to try to just feel better, or you know, it starts to fall away, you know, and you start to explore the things. But it's quite a mysterious thing, isn't it? It's hard to even pin stuff like this down. It's a moving target. I mean, everybody's so different. I mean, that's the thing. Every individual is so unique in the way that their conditioning and their system is set up, and what they need or what they don't need. There's no way to say this is the answer.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, right?
Yeah, right. Unfortunately, there's so many things being marketed as the answer for all people all the time.
Right, right, right. And that's part of the game, you know. I mean, that's part of the marketing game. But in the end, I think, you know, in the end, I think people have insights like you're having, is that everything has a limit, and everything has a shelf life, and then you move on. There was a lady who came to me from Byron Katie's work, and she said, "Scott, your work is like a knife compared to Katie's plastic spoon." And I said, "Well, don't worry. One day my work will be like a plastic spoon, you know,
Hmm.
because it will be. I mean,
Hmm.
you'll move on.
Hmm.
It's just a relative thing."
Hmm.
So,
So how, um, with the Kiloby Center, do you have to do marketing?
oh yeah, yeah, we
Yeah.
do. Yeah,
So
because yeah,
yeah, I'm very curious about that because marketing is one of the things that personally I struggle with because you know I think again for people who especially in the spiritual scene, but I would assume also kind of people would probably make this assumption about a recovery center as well. I think people assume that uh, don't really do marketing for spiritual stuff or you know whatever. But I mean, it's like really. I mean, how do you think Eckhart Tolle sold 10 million copies of The Power of Now? I mean, it's through marketing,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and but I struggle with marketing personally because the number one rule of I mean I studied marketing and the number one rule of marketing is you sell the promise that you're going to solve a person's problem, whatever
yeah,
that is. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to promise that I'm going to solve somebody's problem because in my experience, I don't have the ability to make good on that promise.
right. And I think that I don't know if it's ethical in marketing in healthcare to say you're going to solve somebody's problem. I mean, it does go on, but there are questions about how you would phrase something like that,
Mm-hmm.
ethics in marketing. Um, but you know, there are definitely ways to help people with drug and alcohol addiction that are measurable. Actually, they're
Uh-huh.
measurable. I mean, if someone is clean and abstinent, sober for a period of time, if their relationships and family relationships have improved, if there's a greater sense of peace, even if they're still struggling, you can measure those things. If there's a decrease in anxiety, addictive cravings, depression, you can measure those things. And in the healthcare industry, we're required to measure those things. We don't have the luxury of not measuring them
Mm.
because we're overseen by the state of California. we're overseen by an accreditation organization, and they are constantly requiring us to prove the measurability of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then also just in the when you own a healthcare center, you have infrastructure. So you have to have employees, you have to pay those employees, and if you're a good employer, you'll give them healthcare and other benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have buildings and facilities and equipment, and so all of that requires money. And so marketing is important so that you can keep your infrastructure in place, and so you can still help people.
Yeah.
So though the healthcare industry is a little bit different than the spiritual one. Going back to the spiritual thing, part of the thing is that this whole thing about marketing, I mean, yeah, I don't really have a problem with it. To me, it goes to a deeper issue about this whole thing about phenomena, which means the world. And because there's lots of view, even some of the people who hold sort of the anti-money or anti-marketing view also have some anti-sex views or anti-phenomenon views. And as if the world of phenomena is something bad and that it should be escaped at all costs. And that's something, so there's for me, there's this view that needs to be looked at around that. But I don't hear that's what you're saying, because you're saying the promise, because we can talk about that. That's a different thing. The promise and spirituality is a tricky area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely we should put that aside. But some people who have sort of anti-marketing views and around spirituality also have anti-phenomenal views.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense of being against the world, of trying to escape the world instead of living freely, living in it in a different way, you know, instead of. So it's an interesting topic to explore, but.
I definitely hear a lot of that, and you know that this. It's actually amazing to me how people who read my blog will post comments on my blog telling me how it is, which in their opinion is, you know, I am not the body, I am not of the world, I am spirit, I am pure consciousness, and I am divorced from everything that's actually happening. And I'm like, really? Okay, well, I mean, where is that? Because my actual experience is this what's actually happening. This is it. This is my actual experience. So what you're proposing is something that's, you know, it's a non-phenomenal thing. I don't know. I don't have any experience of it.
Not only that, it's a non-phenomenal thing that is divorced and separate from all the phenomenal things.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
So where is that? Is it good? You know, isn't that the most basic duality? If you want to talk about duality,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know either where that is. I know where the suffering comes from, though. I know where the questions come from, because the phenomenal world, which is really the only world that we have, because it can't be divided from anything else, is very pain-inducing, like suffering-inducing. And so I can understand it. I mean, I was at one point wanting to leave the world, I think, when I was on drugs, because, you know, I can understand the pain, but I think it does go into this really weird place. It can go to this weird place where, you know, I feel like I've reached a place in which I'm beyond all phenomena or something, you know. And then and then that means I'm also anti-phenomenon, you know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, which I understand. I mean, like you're saying, the phenomenal world is painful oftentimes, and it doesn't, at least my experience is, there doesn't seem to be an end to that. You know, it seems like on a daily basis there's pain of all kinds. There's I mean, people talk about being with a capital B, right? But to me, you know, it's like there is discomfort or pain is synonymous with being. They are inseparable.
Yeah.
And so when my view is that, at least from my experience, what I was searching for in spirituality was death. I wanted out. And I just called it by a different name, and I dressed it up in fancy clothes.
I said the same thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. But that's the thing, you know, when people say to me, well, give me the answer. How do I stop suffering? And I don't have that answer. I've never found it.
I mean, I think the thing that we can say, I don't know if your experience is like this, is that, you know, the way that I used to suffer is I used to carry things over a lot more. So like if I would feel pain or feel anger or feel sadness or physical pain or whatever, because of how my mind was attaching to the things, I would carry it over and tell the story about it, and that became part of everything about who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the woe is me thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that definitely has decreased, the sense
Mm-hmm.
of carrying things over in time. But the rising of the pain,
Yeah.
I woke up this morning with pain again, which I've had in my spine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or you know, I was angry last week for a reason that happened to do with the business. That didn't change. That all happened. But I do think it's okay to say, I mean, see what you think, is that I don't know, I heard somebody say it's like suffering still happens, but it bothers you less. But I would say suffering still happens, but you carry it over less. You can carry it over less. You can and you can't. Sometimes you'll hold on to things, but I think that possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think my experience is that that I used to have a sense that I had a narrative about everything, and that narrative was I, I perceived that that narrative was the mediator between me and reality, and so getting that narrative right was
Yeah,
very important, and my focus was always on the narrative. And now there's a narrative. I mean, narratives happen, but I don't really perceive that the narrative is about what's happening. It's more that the narrative is part of what's happening,
yeah,
and so the importance that I used to give to trying to interpret everything and find the meaning in everything
yeah,
is really lessened. And
yeah,
now there's pain, there's discomfort. Um, Relatively, there can be a seeking for the meaning of it, like uh, why am I experiencing this particular pain? Is it, find the source of it so that I can remove it? But in another sense, I just don't really have any belief that I can actually find the core discomfort, the source of, because again, it seems like the core of the discomfort is it's being alive.
yeah.
And I don't really have a desire to do away with that anymore, or even a sense that I could do away with it.
Right. And that's probably helped you with, well, certainly it's probably helped you with the seeking enlightenment thing, because isn't that a lot about trying to get rid of that core restlessness?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, the seeking for enlightenment is, it's like, to me, it's like, I remember as a kid being anxious on Christmas Eve in anticipation of Santa
Yeah,
arriving.
yeah,
And I no longer feel anxious about Santa arriving because I have seen through that. And in the same way, I used to feel anxious about I've got to get enlightenment.
yeah.
Now I don't have that anxiety because I don't really feel that whatever I thought enlightenment was going to be, it doesn't seem to be there.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And when you talk about it, and for addiction recovery, the core restlessness is there when they're using drugs and alcohol. And when they stop using drugs and alcohol, the core restlessness is still there, but you learn to be with it, so to speak, in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And then less and less need to medicate that. And then after a while, you don't even really have much of a desire, hopefully, to medicate it, if things go well. But part of the thing is then deconstructing some of the ideas that you around, well, one day I'm going to finally get rid of that, you know, because there's something about being embodied as a human being that carries with it. Well, a need to survive. That's
Yeah.
not going to completely go away, because if it did, we would die.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a core restlessness that goes with that.
Yeah.
You know, just the need to survive, and it's probably evolutionarily a good idea, to have that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that we think about survival, you know, how did we survive as humans? Did we really survive by sitting in a cave like this? Is that really how we survived our whole species?
Hmm.
Just sit here quietly in nirvana? I mean, that's not how we survived. We survived by feeling anxious and restless and getting out and hunting and having sex and feeling attacked at certain points
Hmm.
by other, you know, and reacting to that. And, you know, and that's an interesting thing to talk about right there, is that may be necessary as part of the embodiment of being human, all of that. And that, to me, may be where the core restlessness comes in. But the thing about with people on the drugs and alcohol who are addicted to that is that it's really, really scary. I've lived it. When that core restlessness is hooked up into killing yourself through drugs and alcohol, because then it's no longer about survival. You know, the mind thinks it needs the alcohol to survive, and it's sort of been hijacked in that way. And there's a way to make a change where you recognize that's not what I need for my survival, because that's killing me. And then you get off of that, but you still recognize that there is a core restlessness there at the bottom of things. But I don't know, and then you learn to live differently with that.
Hmm.
I don't know. That's, I think, the best I can say about it around the addiction issue.
Hmm. So some people who come to the recovery center are um, have they all gone through a detox process before they arrive, or is that a service that's provided as well?
Yeah, they've all gone through it. We're working on having a detox house, but we're not there yet. There's some things with California law that keep it from happening, which I won't go into, but it just takes certain personnel that we're trying to get in place. But yeah, they're all detoxed before they get there. And that's a whole other thing, because if they're not, some try to detox themselves, and that's a little scary, because if they still come through the heavy withdrawal cycle, it's hard for them to even sit and be with us, because the
Right.
body is really screaming for something.
Yeah. So you say that I just want to jump back to something you said earlier, because I just remembered and I thought it was really interesting. You say that the way that the regulations are set up, you are, as a healthcare provider, you are required to meet all kinds of requirements, and you have to, and standards, and you have to show your some kind of test results. Yeah, and that's interesting to me, because that seems like, I mean, on the one hand, I'm sure there are negatives of that, you know, all the regulation that we could speculate about. But on the other hand, I can see the positive of it, which is that there's actually some kind of transparency and accountability in the market that you're in now, whereas in the spiritual market, there's no such thing. It's one of the things that I'm most vocal about, you know, just because I see the harm that comes as a result of that. Because anybody can make claims. Somebody sent me an email, some new guy on YouTube who claims that or maybe he's not all that new, I don't know. He claims that he's got more power in his little finger, and he can control people with his little finger. And you know, anybody can make these claims. You know, they can claim I can, you know, cleanse you of your karma. I can do all of these things, but there's no the burden of proof is not on those people. And I don't know. I'm not necessarily expecting you to have anything to say about that, but I just thought it just sparked that for me, because I thought that was really interesting that they're in the healthcare market. You have those requirements. It would be I'm not a big fan of government and regulation, but it would be nice if there was some kind of if everybody held themselves, and it just as a culture, as a society, to those same kinds of ethics and standards. That would be nice.
Yeah, I think it would be nice because you mentioned the damage that it can do to people. You know,
Yeah.
especially people who are really heavily seeking and they're looking for the next thing and the next thing.
Yeah.
For someone to be able to report something about what they're doing, say here are the measurable outcomes. I'm not just saying that my pinky has that power, but I have documented,
Mm-hmm.
and have people that can verify that or something. Yeah, it's tricky, but I don't think it's going to be coming in anywhere the near future.
No. No.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that? I mean, that's a shift for you in the last 2.5 years, moving over to healthcare. Do you have positive feelings about that, or what?
First, I had negative feelings about it because I'm not a big fan of over regulation either, because after being an attorney, although
Mm-hmm.
there are some good things about regulation too, because it keeps some systems in check.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was not a fan of it at the beginning because, you know, from the non-dual world that I came from, the idea of measuring outcomes plays into the seeking also. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm seeking the particular outcome. So I think there was some resistance for me at first, but then after I realized what we're doing there is helping people with a very serious health issue.
Mm-hmm.
And when we make the statement that we are a treatment center, that we're treating or helping that, then we need to be able to show the ways in which we're doing that, and that there's something on the other side that's hopefully going to help people, and that we can show that it does.
Mm-hmm.
And otherwise, I just, so I'm not at all resistant to it now. In fact, I'm very much in it, because
Yeah.
the responsibility there, I think, you know, for people working with people.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought that occurs to me, because when you were identified as an, and not, I mean, I'm not suggesting you identified, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but people certainly identified you as a non-dual teacher. You were still getting a lot of emails and requests from people about addiction,
Yeah,
and recovery, and so they were looking for a certain outcome. I mean, they could identify what their problem was, or at least an aspect or a manifestation of that problem. I'm addicted to drugs. I've got this problem, this lifestyle problem that's killing me. And they're coming to you, even though you're marketed at that time as a non-dual teacher.
yeah,
So non-duality, or even spirituality in a sense, is very dishonest, because it proposes kind of a panacea. Whatever your problem is, I can solve it.
yeah,
Whereas what you're doing now seems more honest, because you're saying, you've identified, if you can identify what your problem is, you have a drug or alcohol addiction problem, great, come here if this seems like the right place for you, and we can help you with that.
right.
And I've been thinking about this for myself too, because, like I say, I get a lot of inquiries for people who are looking for help with depression, and I've had quite a few people who have written to me almost word for word saying, I've sought for an answer everywhere else, which isn't actually everywhere else, because they list off what everywhere else is, and it's like Buddhism and Christianity and Osho, and but I'm certain that non-duality is the answer to my depression, and if it's not, then nothing else is.
Mm.
And it seems to me like, a depression treatment center would be a more appropriate venue for treating depression than non-duality, because non-duality, not that somebody who is a non-duality teacher might not have something of value to offer and might not be able to help somebody through depression, but just as it's marketed as non-duality or spirituality or whatever the case may be, there's a dishonesty in that, I think.
I think you're absolutely right, because you said the word that you used started with a P, and I don't know that word, but I want to know it. You said the pan something.
Oh, panacea, where it's the solution to all problems. It's the cure for all ills.
But that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the real issue.
Yeah.
Is that it's stated that way, and that's one of the things that I don't like about that, because, just thinking about depression. I mean, it's not, non-duality is not the last frontier for depression at all. I mean, they just came out with a machine called a TMS machine, which activates stimulates parts of the brain.
Yeah, sure.
Depression, and that might be the last frontier. I mean, that might be the one that's actually going to help. I mean, there's nothing out there. There's certainly no, I know of no scientific evidence that non-duality is the answer to all problems. It's it's one part of the mix, I think, like that it can help, that this kind of a teaching or a realization can help certainly can help have clarity around certain things, but not as an endpoint. It's just in conjunction with a lot of other things that are helpful.
I agree.
Yeah, because what we're doing at the center is just integrating. So the whole idea is, you integrate things that work. So if somebody comes to us and they're addicted to drugs and alcohol, and we detox them, and we help them just become mindful of the cravings and get in their body more and release some trauma, which is all great. And then we might send them to get a naltrexone implant, which is an implant that goes in your stomach, and it just diminishes cravings for up to a year, gives them some clean time.
Yeah.
Integrate that, or integrate the TMS, or integrate nutrition. And that seems smarter than saying that there's one thing, including Scott Kiloby's approach, because we don't say that. We don't say Scott Kiloby's approach.
Mm-hmm.
Is that we say what we're doing here is a multidimensional integration of things, and that our work is the Scott Kiloby, whatever that is just part of the thing that we're doing for people. And I think that has to do with ethics and responsibility too. But, we're in a different world here, Joey. I mean, this healthcare industry is a different relative world.
Mm-hmm.
than the spiritual world. There's a lot of things that are very, very different than it is in the, and I understand where you're coming from, because I used to be more in the non-dual world than I am now. And all the things that you're voicing are concerns. It's almost like you and I are like connected, like soul to soul on this, because like I'm talking to myself. I've said the same things, and I'm glad you're out there saying them. It needs a voice like you. It really does. I'm not blowing smoke up your arse. It really does need a voice like that who's just going to say, listen, no, let's test what's being said here. Let's question what's being said here. I mean, it really does need a voice. But I don't know that ever we're going to get to the place where spirituality is overseen or regulated. So then it comes down to what are the ethical principles or guidelines that teachers themselves impose upon themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And because then you have to self-regulate what you're doing and saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, that's a whole other thing, because there's no agency out there that licensed you as a spiritual teacher,
Mm-hmm.
where you have to do continuing education, and
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going to take away your license if you don't,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yep. Yeah, right. And who's not a lot of people are going to voluntarily retract their statements when those statements are part of their brand, part of how they make their money.
Right. I guess it's just you mostly you can share from your own experience, and you're okay. You can say, this is how something helped me,
Right.
or it did, then you're pretty safe. But when you start to say, this is a promise that I can do for you, and this is the outcome, you don't have anything really back that up. I think I think it's okay for us all to share from our own experience, because I want to know your experience. It's why I've been asking some questions. You've told me a little bit about it, but I want to know, how did this, whatever this subject we're talking about, help in some way. I mean, you said it stopped the seeking, or and that was. So when you share from that, I go, okay, that's your experience. I can trust that. That's your, not that it's going to be mine, but that's your experience, and I can trust that. But if you then said, well, I have a way that guarantees to end seeking for all people who come to me, well, then now you're making a difference.
Right. Yeah, and that's the sort of thing you would get you get fined if, and probably have all your licenses revoked if you try to do that at the Kiloby Center, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Safe.
Mm-hmm. So you're small to medium size. So what's the maximum number of people you can see at a time?
Right now it's 15.
Mm-hmm.
We have a house that has about 9 to 10 beds, depending on how we structure the rooms. And then some are just outpatient, they don't stay in our house. So it's about 15 right now, and it goes up and down at different times depending on.
Mm-hmm. And like you say, you have, for paying the bills, you want to keep that as close to 15 as possible. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a very small ratio of facilitator to client. We don't, because a lot of the other centers, what they'll do is they'll have a lot of different groups. So they'll have one facilitator or counselor there for 30 people in a group. But, we want to get it to where we're kind of more one-on-one. And so to do that, to have like that ratio of one facilitator or counselor per every 2 people or 3 people, we have to have enough facilitators on staff, which is the payroll, that's the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So it all ties into how many clients we need to have there just to stay open, basically.
Yeah. So you're not in charge. Are you in charge of the all the business aspects of it, or you have somebody else?
But I get a lot of help. I mean, my husband is a CFO, and then my business partner Julianne, she does a lot of it. And, but between the 3 of us, we take care of it. But we have attorneys and accountants and all that.
Mm-hmm. What's your title?
Director. That's the title of one who runs the treatment center.
Mm-hmm. So it keeps you busy, and you're at a conference now. I mean, you're at a hotel right now, but you're you're attending a conference while you're there.
Yeah, I'm attending a conference. I'm only attending the first day of a 3-day conference. I think it's called Innovations in Recovery. I'm actually here to meet with other treatment center providers, because in the last year I've become somewhat knowledgeable about how to avoid insurance fraud, because there's a lot of insurance fraud claims in California and Florida. And so what I did as an attorney is I just studied up on that and really tried to keep our center in as good of alignment as we could with compliance with the law and insurance policies. And then my name sort of got known as someone who knows about that, so I get invited to these things to speak on that subject of all things. And who knew a year ago that I would be doing that? Because that's what's happening.
So insurance fraud, meaning that you would lose the money, or what? How would that work?
There's various forms of insurance fraud, but basically it's kickbacks for referrals. So there'll be some treatment centers who pay $3,000 if you refer a client to us. That's illegal. And then, or they will they'll treat a patient, but they'll never will bill the patient. So they'll bill only the insurance company. So that's a pretty common thing that I'm talking about, is how you're actually required to bill clients for anything the insurance doesn't cover. There's all sorts of other things, like they're called waivers, that you have to be careful around. Just a lot of legal stuff. But so somehow I just did a conference in Florida around this topic. So yeah.
Wow. So the legal background has come in handy.
Because I mean, just to say what I was saying in the beginning is, when we opened the center, I did not know what I was doing. I don't mind admitting, I really didn't know.
Sure.
And started taking insurance, I didn't know what I was doing, and so I was having to study it every day to make sure I wasn't making mistakes. And then it took me probably a year to really understand the complex laws around healthcare and health insurance, and then get our center really in compliance. And then, so yeah, it's been very helpful to have that background.
So when people come to the center, you accept insurance if they have, if their insurance covers some of the cost of recovery.
Right, insurance will usually cover some of the costs, right?
Yeah. Like how much will insurance cover?
It depends on the policy. Some insurance covers up to 80% of it, and some covers like 40, 50%. And then there's some really bad policies that cover like 20 or 30%, but
Wow.
each policy is different.
Yeah. So the costs are the cost on average, the cost to the person who's coming to the center still end up being relatively high.
It could be depending on what their income status is, because
Okay.
so like we have a low cost scholarship program,
Mm-hmm.
which you can come for $15 a month actually.
Oh.
If you make less than, if you made pretty low income. And so we try to look at what they actually make.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of that goes on. But yeah, if somebody has money, then they have to pay, obviously.
Yeah.
So we try to base as much as we can on income. It's kind of like a sliding scale.
Yeah.
But again, if somebody can pay, they have to. And that's part of the ethical and legal obligations, because if you charge an insurance company, but you don't charge a client who can pay, that's actually fraudulent. So
Yeah, right. Well, so I would think also that a client who makes the financial investment also has an investment in their recovery.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. More than if you got something for free. We have seen that before, where if someone thinks they're going to get something for free, or they won't invest as much in it. It's not.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's true of everybody.
No, sure. Yeah. Well, so for the foreseeable future, you're content with the Kiloby Center.
Yeah, I think let's see, I'm working up to sometimes 50 and 60 hours a week. And so my job now is to cut down. What I've been trying to do is give myself days off where I don't do any work, and then trying to get, so what I'm trying to work down is to more like a half week, because it's just a lot, to do that.
Yeah, sure. That doesn't also include the travel and the conferences and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, that includes that. The travel is kind of nice. It's kind of like getting away from things, but I end up having to work during that too. But
right.
Yeah, but part of it is just being an owner of any business. If you open a business, you've probably done it before.
Sure.
Where you're the owner, you have to put in the hours to.
Yeah. Well, this has been very enjoyable. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, I hope we can keep in touch, Joey. I like a lot of your ideas, and I think you're really level-headed around all this. And yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We'll be in touch. Okay. Bye for now.